Listen to that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, March 10th, 2019, unless you're watching this after we do it live. And then, it's whatever time and date it is when you're watching it. Pretty easy. I'm Matt Dillahunty, hosting this week. Joining me, Jim Helton from American Atheists. Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. We've got a handful of announcements to get out of the way. There's a bunch of people on the other side. And that is in part, at least in small part, that Austin's South by Southwest Festival convention-y super awesome thing has started as of Friday. For those who don't know, go look it up. South by Southwest, it's movies, music, technology, I don't know, whatever. Basically, it's the week where you really would have to pay me a lot to go downtown because I live here and so my city has changed, but it's still awesome. And if you're down by Southwest, talk to some of the locals about things that you might want to do other than just South by. Like I would recommend that you go to Esther's Follies this weekend if you can, if there's actually a show, and that you hit Torchy's Tacos and countless other places. But I'm not here to advertise for all of these other things. We have stuff of our own that we need to advertise. And as a reminder, hit up the Atheist Community of Austin social media, Facebook and elsewhere, and you'll find that the March edition of the magazine is now out. Coming up in 2 weeks, right? The weekend of the 22nd, 23rd. March 23rd is Atheist Day, International Atheist Day. Kind of a new spin on something that's, been done in various types and things before, this time by Atheist Republic. But the Atheist Community of Austin is going to be doing, it's like a weekend of events. There's going to be Thomas Westbrook, Aaron Ron, a bunch of others are going to be at the Capitol talking about, atheism on this Atheist Day weekend. And then Seth Andrews will be here for an event as well. I will not be here. And so if you're not in Austin, you can either come down to Austin for that, or you could book yourself for the Free Thought Cruise if it's not already too late, because that's where I'll be that weekend. I'm driving all the way down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, boarding a cruise ship along with a couple hundred other freethinkers, atheists, secular humanists, etc. And I'll be doing my Magic and Skepticism show and a meet and greet, and then touring Cuba and the Bahamas. Although I just saw a travel advisory for the Bahamas, so I'm a little nervous. State Department puts out travel advisories, and I haven't paid attention to any of them since I was in the Navy, and we would get them handed to us. It'd be like, oh, we're pulling into port here, and here's all the State Department's notifications and stuff. So that's what's going on in the immediate future. But you're here to talk about a couple of things that are coming up the following month in April and beyond.
Yes, so very excited. American Atheist Convention is coming Easter weekend to my hometown in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's going to be at the Hilton Netherland Plaza. Super excited.
Around
Jim
the world,
Ogerfeld.
Secular groups are gathering this March to celebrate the first.
We're getting audio for something that we're not seeing, so I'll stop talking.
So Jim Ogerfeld is a keynote. He was with the Supreme Court decision for marriage equality. We're going to have plenty of workshops and other things going on. Are really reaching out to the local community, the local affiliates, and activists to come out there to learn how to get involved in their community, how they can make a difference and make change at their city councils, school boards, and state-level legislation. So we're very excited about our convention coming up in Cincinnati.
And I'll go ahead and pause for a second, because if Mark has the ad for Atheist Day ready to go, as it sounds like he might have, then this would be a good time to insert it. And if not,
around the world, secular groups are gathering this March to celebrate the first International Atheist Day. While we encourage atheist groups to come together and celebrate, we invite you to join us. Because lacking religion does not constitute hate. Because in many parts of the world, disbelief can have tragic consequences. Because it's time to create an international community. Because where we can be counted, we should. Stand up this March 23rd and join us as we demand to be counted.
there you go. There's more information available. Click the websites, visit the Atheist Community of Austin social media stuff, and Atheist Republic as well. And then, as we move towards April for the American Atheist Convention, and I'm coming up for that as well. And I try to go every year. I had to miss last year because of a conflict. But I'm looking forward to this. I mean, we've got a new president. We've got an interesting lineup of speakers already set. And I think there's possibly a few more announcements coming. I don't know. Somebody was going to call me tomorrow.
But what's exciting is the city of Cincinnati rolled out the red carpet for us. They were like, what do we have to do to get your business? We want the American Atheist Convention here. The hotels were like, we want American Atheists here. And to have that hospitality and them really want us to be here and what they offered and what they're doing to work with us. And a unique thing is we are going to have a rally on Good Friday on Fountain Square outside in the middle of downtown, in the middle of all the businesses on Good Friday to kick off the convention, which we're super excited about.
Outstanding. And then you've got, so you and I first met several years ago, and we would mostly bump into each other in and around Kentucky and Tennessee and Cincinnati or at a big national convention. You were working with the tri-state community there and lots of activism. Your whole family's involved with activism. Your daughter's one of my favorite activists. But you kind of really jumped in, took charge, and did things. And you did things in a different way than some other organizations were doing. It was incredibly successful. And now you're, working with American Atheists. What's your official title? Is it now? Is it National
Field Organizer.
National Field Organizer. So if you've got a field and you need it to be taken care of, contact Jim.
I'm your person. Yeah, basically, I took the business model of the Tri-State Freethinkers of ACEs, Activism, Community Service, Education, Social. We wanted to build a true community for atheists, humanists, and one thing, and we wanted to make change in our community where as atheists we could be involved where the mayor's inviting us to come speak.
Right.
Interfaith leaders are asking atheists to do invocations. We can be keynote speakers at the Women's March for Science in front of 10,000 people, and we really integrated ourselves. And we're taking that plan, and now my job is to work with affiliates and groups or people that want to start groups in their community that want to get involved. How do we raise money? How do we form a board? How do we do these things? And how do we get involved in our community? And so I travel the country helping groups do those very things to take on the issues in their state that's important to them, because it varies. What's important to Kentucky, I live in between the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter,
right,
is very different than, say, Florida or New York or California. Of whatever your issue may be, we help them with toolkits go after those things.
And this is a really good example of something we talked about many times, because for years there was discussion of, should I be a firebrand or a diplomat? And my answer was always, why can't you be both and do both? And, I've hosted this show I've been on it for nearly 15 years, but hosted 14 years this week, I think. I think it was like March 13th or something, 2005 was the first episode I hosted full-time. But there's different styles, and it's interesting as I go around, if I'm doing a debate, somebody will be like, oh, I watched you on the show, and then I came and saw you in the debate, and it's like you're two different people. And I'm like, yeah, because those are two different environments. Well, why can't you do the show like you do a debate? Oh, that's easy, because we have 6 phone lines, multiple callers, and the people who are calling in aren't necessarily prepared for a formal, structured debate with all this. Plus, when I'm in a debate, I can't hang up on that person and go to another caller. They're the only person there. And what I try to keep in mind, for me, doing the show, is that this is somebody's first introduction to atheism, to secularism, to humanism, et cetera. I'm not always going to get it right, but I think there are different tactics and different tactics needed. There are different things that are going to change people's minds. Sometimes it's going to be an approach that is similar to what I might do. Sometimes it's going to be approached like yours. Some, maybe more like Eric's or Jamie's, or Tracy's going to reach more people than any of us because Tracy's just awesome. But the people believe for different reasons. They're going to give it up for different reasons. But if your goal isn't necessarily to give people to give it up, but instead to reach like atheist normalcy, I can tell you this: no matter how terrible or awesome somebody might think I am, or my approach to this is, the mayor's never invited me to come speak. And yet I've spoken at the Capitol on many occasions because that's what we do. And if the goal, as I think it is, has always been for me, when we talked about the atheist community as an organization for positive atheism, there were some people who took that as if, oh, that means positive and as we are affirming there are no gods. And largely the community, the entire time I've been involved with it, has viewed it in a sense that positive means we are going to be putting a positive face on atheism. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to get upset, that we're not going to, have arguments. These are heated conversations. And so it'll be interesting today as we go through and take phone calls to watch how two different activists who like each other and get along and generally support what each other does might take different tacks in addressing questions.
Yeah, we take different approaches. I think a lot of people argue which is the best way or the right way, but like you said, it's different ways, and they're all good, and they all have their value, and they all have their good approach. It depends on asking you what your target is, what you're trying to do, and you have to take different tactics. Like if you're protesting the Ark Encounter, it's very different than if you're feeding the homeless alongside a church trying to normalize atheism that you're good people. They're very different approaches. Or if you're on a lobby day talking to your representative. It's a very different approach.
This is a conversation that my very good friend Anthony Magnabosco and I have had many times, including on this program, because he's, a street epistemology advocate. And I have some issues with that because I'm not convinced that you're actually, came out and got popularity because of Boghossian's book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. And I'm not convinced that this actually creates atheists. It may on occasion get people to recognize that they're not quite as confident as they thought they were. Whether that's permanent or temporary, I don't know. But it's certainly a good thing because I think all of us are in favor of getting people to ask questions, to question things that they believed. And if you leave this show, after watching today, and you came in as a theist of some stripe, let's say you're a Reformed Jew and you have your particular notions about God, and you watch this show and you're like, yep, I listened to them, I thought about it. Those guys, they don't have the same understanding I do. My reasons are good, and all that did was just kind of reaffirm what I believe. Well, cool. At least you listened. I'm not necessarily convinced that you paid attention, but I haven't done the show yet, so it could be a train wreck today. You never know. But just getting people involved and having the conversations is probably the primary goal, because we know, I just saw this great study that I've referenced like twice in the past few days. We have a lot of in-group, out-group problems. And that goes down to, along racial lines, along gender lines, along religious lines, et cetera. And there's a couple of great studies that are taking a look at this. One of them that I was reading about basically divided people up into random clusters. And so you might have, in a group of 10, you might have 2 people who are Hispanic, a couple African Americans, a couple Asians, a couple of white folks, and with varying different, religious views or political views. And you get them to integrate just a little bit, participate and work jointly on something. And then you start asking them questions. And you have 2 of these groups that are functionally identical with the same characteristics. And once they've worked within their in-group, and then you ask them questions about their group, and you ask them questions about this other group. Like, what percentage of people in your group share your political views? They tend to estimate that the people in their group share their views more than the people who are in their out-group, even though the truth is these 2 groups are functionally identical in their distribution. And it's very easy. It's very interesting for me about how quickly it is that you can break down the normal barriers of our in-group and out-group, and yet how bad it is that we're just going to create new ones. And so it's like, if you're a senator and you've been opposed to gay marriage forever, and then you have a close relative that comes out as gay, all of a sudden your views are incredibly more likely to change. And if you thought that atheists were terrible, or if you thought bad things about some other ethnic group, getting to know them and working alongside them and working towards a goal now puts you guys together in an in-group where at a minimum you're thinking, well, he's not like those other people in that group. But we're always going to draw lines. Getting people aware of this meta-level analysis of how we go about drawing lines seems to me to be something that's of paramount importance. I don't know how many people are going to get it, even after having explained to them that this is what they're doing. But man, if humanism could do any one thing, it would be to do more experiments like that, get the information out so that people realize you are manufacturing in-group, out-group lines all the time. Oh, my family's not like your family. My church isn't like your church. And then when people hear all this stuff about how the Catholic Church is a criminal organization that's been shuffling child rapists around, oh, well, that's not my Catholic Church. Yes, it is. And it's also your Baptist church and your Episcopalian church and all these other things. Once we start realizing that we can't have this personal bias, it makes it a lot easier to say, you know what? Maybe I was wrong about that. Maybe there's a different way of looking at it. And maybe when I have a conversation with an atheist, I don't have to begin with, God has given them over to a reprobate mind and they are trying to destroy, kill babies and wreck the country and all this.
Yeah, I mean, we need to get outside of our bubble and interact with the general public. Yeah. And when I, as an out atheist who might wear a T-shirt or people may recognize me, and Matt, you way more than me, but I want to make sure they have the best experience possible, whether that's my bank teller, Whether it's the waitress who I'm waiting with, that they see somebody that's an atheist, and I want to make sure they have the best experience possible, because they may have had this stereotype of what an atheist is, but that few-minute interaction with me may be like, he seemed like a nice person. And it may make it easier for the next person they come across.
See, and that's probably where I fail, because I don't care if they have the best experience. I just want them to have just a good enough experience that it functionally changes how they thought about atheists in general. I don't have enough time to give everybody the best experience. No, I'm kidding. So on that note, also Ark Encounter stuff is coming up in what, July?
July 6th. We protest the Ark Encounter every year. The misconception is it's failing and going out. It generated $67 million in 2017. It's doing well. It's not doing anywhere near the projections of 2.5 million people,
right,
but it's getting close to $1 million. 1 million people every year, just under. So cash-wise, with all the state incentives they got, with all the government incentives, the separation of religion government, it's important to bring that from a legislative point of view of all the problems Kentucky. I think it's the symbol of what's wrong.
When I went to the Ark Encounter, and I haven't been to the Creation Museum, but I did go to the Ark Encounter. There's a picture up on the screen now. Was that the first Ark Encounter protest?
That was the second one.
Second one. When I went, I didn't even pay for my ticket. Somebody else bought me the ticket. And then when they told me how much the ticket was, I felt ripped off, and I didn't even pay, because as I walk around this thing, it's not even really an ark. It's like half of an ark. It's like ark attached to a building.
To a building, yes.
So from this side, it's like a pretty good magic trick, because from this side, it looks like an ark, and from the other side, it looks like a building with like some wood tacked onto the end of it. And I realize that, you've got to do some stuff like that to make it open to the public. But I walked around, and there were some cool looking displays and some amazing woodwork. The Amish folk did a wonderful job for them. But oh my gosh, it was like, here's a big piece of poster board with a whole bunch of text and a few graphics on it. I'm kidding you. I'm not kidding you at all. My assessment was that a good 35 to 40% of everything you see in the Ark Encounter, you would have been better served getting a coffee table book, because that's all you were really doing was walking around looking at pages of a book. Here's a picture. Here's this. And I know a lot of museums will do stuff like that, but they tend to have more displays. And the displays at the Ark Encounter were, here's a wax figure or a semi-animatronic version of a person. Or on occasion, here's a little, like a whole bunch of empty cages, and then here's one with what we think might have been the dinosaur that was hiding in the ark type.
It's big, which is impressive on the scale, but like you said, the actual exhibits and the displays, there's not much there.
Yeah, I think you could cut that thing down to a fifth the size, have everything in there, and just on one loop, and boom, you're out in less time.
Yeah, I got to tour it, and I had the pleasure of Bill Nye invited me to tour it with him. So I got to tour it for my kid's birthday, go through it, and he agreed to do some selfies, which my favorite picture is Ken Ham in the background scowling, pissed off as Bill Nye's taking pictures with my kids. And my favorite part of the whole thing, and it's on YouTube, Bill Nye turned to me, he's like, Jim, I'm surprised they let you in. But as soon as I walked in the door, as soon as I walked in through that gate, there was security by my side. Like, hey, Jim, how you doing? And had a personal escort through the thing.
They didn't do that for me. But I did ask them if Ken Ham was around, because I would have loved to talk to him while I was there. He was not interested in that, or not available. I don't want to say he wasn't interested. Maybe he was really interested and just not available.
We invited them to the American Atheist Convention if they want to come have a discussion, because they decided to throw their own convention instead of how to talk to atheists. And I'm like, we're right here.
I sent them a message and volunteered. I will speak or debate at your convention for free, and I will pay for you to come into our convention as well, or figure out a way to get them in. And actually, American Atheists had done it before, because Ray Comfort, I believe, spoke at American Atheist Convention in 2008, 2009, or something along those lines.
That was before my time. But.
Yeah, and if I'm misremembering, I apologize. Maybe this is some kind of online. If somebody knows, post it in chat, get a link, whatever else. But yeah, I was more than happy to say, why don't we do, it doesn't have to be a formal debate. We could just do a discussion. Like, I will sit down at your convention with Ray and Ken, both of them. They can ask me questions. The audience can ask me questions. And then we'll turn around and do the same thing for you. We can, and granted, I'm not in charge of the convention, so I don't get to schedule anything. But I'm pretty sure that if I could have got Ken Ham to sit up on stage in exchange for this, let's exchange speakers thing, we'd have found some time.
We would have found time. And we had this discussion because I formally invited them because they send staff to the protest. So they had staffers there, and we talked to them about it and inviting them. And we talked about if Ken Ham would come, we would be willing to have this sit-down conversation. I think the conversation would be better than a formal debate.
Absolutely.
But they've so far have expressed zero interest in doing so.
The other thing that strikes me funny about this is that the American Atheist Convention, with one or two exceptions, is always on Easter weekend. And they're like, oh, why are you doing that? Are you just doing it to like mock Christianity? Yeah. No, that's not actually it. It is a weekend. It is a holiday weekend that a lot of people have off and that atheists don't have anything to celebrate because unlike Christmas, Easter isn't cool. And so it seemed like a good weekend. Plus, there's some opportunity to get some publicity in there. But when Ken and Ray announced that they were having a convention that same weekend, I was sitting here going, how are you going to get Christians to come out on Easter weekend to your convention?
And that's not the only one. There's another big Christian convention in Cincinnati that weekend also. There's a third now.
Wow.
People
that should
really
tell
like
you
that
exactly how much Easter sucks. The single most important holiday in all of Christianity is Easter. Undeniable. From a biblical and theological standpoint, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the single most important point in all of Christianity, and that makes Easter weekend what should be the most important holiday. And even after they stole it from pagans and tried to modify it and give away chocolate and have bunnies and Easter eggs and do everything they can to make it fun, Christians still don't want to fucking go to church on Easter. They want to go to, let's go to a convention just so we can yell at the atheists.
And the American Atheist Convention solved all those problems for me and my family. I am out of town. It is fantastic. It just solved all my problems.
All right. On that note, we're going to start taking callers. We got full lines, and I want to make sure we get to as many of these people as possible. We've got Aiden in Ontario who's got a problem. Oh, well, now that I read a larger description of your point, I'm not sure that we have that much of a disagreement. But go ahead, Aiden. Welcome to the show.
Okay, that's entirely possible. Yeah, well, if I can just explain my disagreement that I think I have with you, although apparently I might not, it's that I've heard you. I think I've heard you use the argument or argumentative point against the Bible that that basically, it says that bats are a type of bird, which obviously they aren't, or that whales are a type of big fish. And obviously that's something that's wrong in the Bible. I disagree with that.
Yeah, so I don't think I've ever used, I've never pointed out that the Bible says whales are big fish because I don't think the Bible says that at all. The Jonah story says big fish, and a lot of people interpreted that as whale. But the Bible,
okay.
I'm not aware of any verse where it says that whales are big fish. Now, there is a verse where bats are essentially...
Yeah, that wouldn't be my problem with that one anyway. So.
Yeah, there is a verse where bats are essentially lumped in with birds when they're not birds. And I'm not saying that the Bible is wrong about all these other things because it seems to suggest that bats are birds. I'm just saying that that's in the Bible and it's not technically correct. It has no bearing on anything else in the Bible. Other than if somebody claims that the Bible is the perfect word of God, that's an easy way to show that they're not correct. So is the Bible.
And so I guess we do actually have some disagreement then, because, I would say that doesn't, I don't think it's the perfect word of God, but I would say that doesn't disqualify it from it because it is a flying thing, right? And presumably their decision-making process behind lumping it together would be, these are the flying things, these are the swimming things.
I understand, Aiden. I understand, Aiden. And if your view is that, ancient people who didn't understand, modern taxonomy wrote it and included it in with the flying things, fine. It's only a problem if you're claiming that a perfect God delivered a perfect word and then pointing out an imperfection is a problem. If you just want to say that, ancient people, the Hebrew language is limited, their understanding of stuff. Certainly we didn't have the taxonomic classes that we have now. And so they just listed bats with flying things because that's their best understanding and it's not all that accurate. Then I'm going to say, yes, you're absolutely correct. I have no issue with it. It's not like I was a Christian for 25 years, read a verse where bats were included and then said, whoop, this God stuff's just malarkey. That's not remotely what happened.
Yeah, well, and that would obviously be the other issue with that would be that obviously nobody would find it convincing as a problem with the Bible.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, I mean, granted, I've done a bunch of events with Sam Harris and we like each other. We agree on many things. There's some things we don't. But in his letter to a Christian nation, when he spent that, I mean, it's a tiny, tiny little book. I've talked about this before. He talks about the Bible story where where he says the Bible says pi equals 3. And the Bible doesn't ever say that at all. It describes a well and it gives the dimensions of a well. And then if you do the math, you end up with pi being 3. And they're like, aha, we've got you. And there are actually Christian apologists who've drawn wells, actual diagrams of wells, where you can have a 30 cubit circumference and a 10 meter diameter, depending on whether you measure from the inside of the well to the outside of the well, when you get the wall thickness and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. It's still a pretty close approximation. But at the end of the day, my objection to Sam including it wasn't that he was technically wrong, although I would argue he was technically wrong. It's because there's not a Christian on the planet who's going to go, oh man, that story about the well and them getting the value of pi wrong like that? Psh, screw Jesus, I'm done. That's never going to happen. And if you're putting out a book that is called Letter to a Christian Nation, and you want to highlight problems in their theology and the doctrine of the Bible, that's one of the weakest possible things you could include. And for it to be in there in a small book, I found kind of silly.
And just like the bats and birds, you can pick your flaw.
Yeah.
Like you can pick, there's so many to choose from. And just because you comment on one doesn't mean that's your argument to disprove or go through Christianity. But there's just so many.
Oh,
Where do you
for
begin?
the record, I wasn't trying to claim that was your argument against Christianity or something.
Yeah, no. It's a quick thing to go to. There's also, whether or not hares chew the cud and other stuff like that. And they're only...
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one.
Yeah, there are only points against people who are like, oh, the Bible is the perfect word of God, inspired by man, and if you find an error, then it's just, man changing things after the fact. Well, then it's, at a minimum, it's clearly no longer still a perfect word of a God. And then you can get into stuff like, Mark 16, verses 9 through 20, which don't exist in the oldest manuscripts. And that's where you get into the notion that people can, if they're truly doing God's work, they can drink any poisonous thing and it won't hurt them and they can handle serpents. There's loads of problems. But my biggest problem is setting aside the entire Bible. I find no evidence, no way to confirm supernatural events or causation, and no good evidence for the proposition of any God or anything supernatural. And pointing to a book is never going to do it, no matter how right the book was. Even if it said that, even if like the verse after the bats thing said that technically bats aren't birds, but you won't find this out for 1,000 years. That would have been really cool, but it still doesn't mean it came from a God.
Yeah, that would be very interesting.
It would. It would be nice if there were things, what happens with a lot of people is that, and this happens in Christianity and in Islam in particular, where science discovers something and then people go back and scour through and try to find a way where their holy book made a prediction. Oh, see, it was right the whole time. Well, even if that were the case, we didn't know it was right until we actually went out and tested it. So it was useless information. It's like, that germ theory of disease. In Matthew 15, where the Pharisees are coming after Jesus, and they start with this, why do your guys not wash their hands, which is tradition. Jesus had an opportunity there to say, you know what, we really should be washing our hands to get rid of those pesky little things that get on our hands that cause us to become sick. But instead, Jesus commits a tu quoque fallacy, basically saying, oh yeah, well, you're a hypocrite too. And, because you don't advocate for, honoring thy father and mother and stuff. And, oh, by the way, it's not what you put in your mouth that defiles you. It's what comes out of your mouth that defiles you, which he's talking about.
You've actually mentioned that on the atheist debates too, haven't you?
Yeah, I just did a video about that a week or so, or a month ago. So it's kind of fresh in my mind. But it's funny that here was an opportunity for somebody that they view to be God incarnate to tell us something good and useful. And instead he commits a logical fallacy. Basically saying, you're a big hypocrite too, and then doesn't point out to people that it might be a good idea to wash their hands before they eat.
In the using the holy book to prove your religion, when every religion uses their holy book to prove God's, like, give me an argument that doesn't prove other religions also.
Yeah.
That's unique to yours. I need a unique argument, and yet to be.
To his credit, one of the...
And that's actually probably the best point you can make against any one of those, because it means you don't have to go into in depth on what exactly is wrong with the specific argument. If you can just go to, well, obviously this would prove any other religion right as well. So obviously it doesn't prove yours.
Yeah. It's very rare that I find somebody, even if we have a debate topic that's supposed to be about a particular religious doctrine, very rarely do we spend that much time on that doctrine and how they are and why they're convinced that it's correct. Instead, we end up with arguments for that would work for any deity. There was a period of time where we were trying to schedule a team debate in Washington or Oregon, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I wanted to have myself and Hina Dadaboy, who's an ex-Muslim, as one of the teams, and then get a pair of Christian apologists who were supposed to be arguing on behalf of any Christian doctrine, the resurrection or whatever. And then we would sit there, and every time they used an argument that would apply to Islam as well, that's where Hina was going to get up and point out that, yes, your argument isn't for Christianity. This also applies to Islam as well. And I was going to run a charity event to raise money on exactly how much time I would need to spend speaking at all during that debate. Because if all they did was present generic arguments for a deistic God, I wouldn't have to say anything. Hina would just wipe the floor with them, and we'd raise money for charity. Nice. But anyway, Aiden, I appreciate the call, and yeah, we're not. That is not a big deal.
Disagree on that at all. Fair enough. Yeah, I love the show. Glad I was able to call in. I'll be listening to the rest of it.
All right.
Thanks, Aiden.
Thanks. We're going to keep going here. We've got Tim in Wisconsin, and I'm going to let you, Jim, start in with Tim, because how are you, Tim?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
It says here that your kids wanted you to call in.
Yeah, they did. My son, Leo, and Luke asked me to call in. They are longtime listeners, and they thought it would be really funny to have me call in, so I'm calling in right now. And
wait, so
just sharing a little bit of my story.
They want you to call in to amuse them, and you said yes.
Yes. Yeah.
You're a great dad.
You got points so far.
Yeah. So
All right.
I'm gonna let Jim start in with this so that because I think that possibly your kids were waiting for me to eviscerate whatever it is that you were about to say, and I'm just not going to.
I'll be nice, but then you shouldn't disappoint the kids by the end.
Maybe after. Anyway,
we'll
we're glad you're here, Tim. Go ahead.
All right. Well, congratulations on your show, and I actually have a birthday coming up on March 14th this week.
Mine's the 31st, so we're all March babies.
Happy birthdays.
Hey, thank you. Well, let me just give you a little bit of background. I was raised Catholic, and my parents through the 70s and through the 80s were part of the evangelical movement, and we moved there. And for a very long time, I was very much involved with the evangelical community. And I raised my kids in a community church, but then my wife at the time, her aunt really kept on giving me all these Catholic books. And I was like, I really want to find out what the truth is. And so I started reading, and all the research that I read about Christianity really pointed to the Roman Church. And so I made that switch, and we were going to church, and my son Luke, who has Asperger's, just kept on sitting in the pews and just lying there during the church services. And so one service after catechism, we went to Dairy Queen. I said, Luke, what's going on? And he basically said, Dad, I don't believe this anymore. And as a fundamentalist Christian, I was very concerned about his eternal future.
Sure.
And so we started having these arguments and discussions back and forth. And so for me, as a Christian, I was more concerned about his eternal future and burning in hell. And so we started going back and forth, and he started sending me videos and then articles, and then I started getting books. And I started to do the research. And as I did the research, he left for a trip to Mexico. And as he was in Mexico, I was reading all these books to make a long story short, after I did all this research, and what I've concluded is that the origin of Christianity is in Rome, and there's actually a book that you can read called Caesar's Rome, if you're familiar with it. And what I've concluded in this is that all religions are at equal standing. They have evolved just like culture, religion, and speech, and we're all part of the same global tribe. And so when my son came back, the very first thing I did was I took all these books I had read, and I'm not going to get into the detail of what those books were, but that was one of them. And I had them in a plastic bag, and I set them on the table, and I bought him an ice cream. And then I sat down with him, and he was sitting right across from me. I said, Luke, I've done a lot of research, and, basically I told him, I said, you know what, you're right. And as I stood up, he just started to weep and cry, and I've never seen my son cry before, because I felt and I stood in judgment over my son and his eternal future. And as a Christian, I was very concerned of that. So, and where I stand now with my faith and religion is that they're all on equal grounds. I'm not an atheist. I am a theist. I would say that, from the research that I've done, I'm probably more of an idealist than anything else. And I've done a lot of research, and I don't think I'm here to convince any of your listeners or any of your viewers of what to believe or not to believe. I respect your views. It is a faith. It's a belief. It's very difficult to prove anything because and I'll put that out there for both of us, if we're seeking the truth and we want to embrace the truth wherever it is, we're willing to go there. And we continue to have these discussions, and I think that's part of the reason why he wanted me to come on the show today. And as I've done my research, there's some things that don't necessarily prove that God exists, but definitely point toward a God. And I'm not talking about a personal God. I'm not talking about a genie that controls things, because if you watch one of my favorite movies, and it's Forrest Gump, there's two questions that are asked in the movie. Are we predestined like Lieutenant Dan, or are things like a box of chocolates like Mama said? And I think we're in a time where, you got the free thoughts, you have a free will to go where you want to go and do what you want to do. There's some things within the Christian belief that people have a hard time explaining if God controls everything. And I'll just give you one simple example. If a baby is born and it passes away and there's no expression of faith, then some Christian beliefs, some Christian doctrines say that they pass a special grace. But if the true nature or the fallen nature of man is in place, then that wouldn't really apply. But there's some doctrines say, well, there's a special grace here. And even within the Catholic faith, there's a special grace applied to Mary. Well, again, going back to religion, this is a creation of man, just like language is a creation of man, just like culture is a creation of man, just like dress is a creation of man. And so I think we are in the very infancy, and I'm very, very, because I am in the very infancy of understanding how things really work. And the way I see the world now is totally different. I see the world globally. I see you. I see Jim, right? Jim,
Yep.
As my brothers on this planet, and we're all trying to do one thing. You've really thought about this. You're trying to uncover the truth.
There's
to uncover the truth.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Let me start and address this from a parent.
I just want to say one more thing.
Sure.
That, you look at some of the greatest minds, like Einstein. I mean, Einstein basically said, it's very, very difficult to understand. We see a universe marvelously arranged, obeying certain laws, but we understand those laws dimly. Our limited mind cannot grasp the mysterious force that sways the constellation. And then Nikola Tesla said, the idea came to me like in a flash of lightning. In an instant, the truth was revealed to him. There is no conflict between the ideal of religion and the ideal of science.
He's wrong.
And then,
or was wrong.
And Tim, you said
another thing. I just want to say one more thing.
You keep saying that.
In relationship to Max Planck, all matter originates and exists only by a virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious, intelligent mind. And as I age, I'm not the same person I was when I was a child. And some of my first memories as a child is when I walked out into the world and experienced the world. I did not know how to speak, but I could experience God. I felt God. I felt God's presence. I didn't know the words of God. I didn't know any church or any religion. And so that's what I carry with me, and that's why I believe in God. So it's a belief.
Okay.
You guys believe right now that there is no God?
No, that's not
I believe that there is a God.
Okay, so we've got a million things to get to. Thank you for quoting so many scientists who I think are monumentally wrong on the subject. It doesn't add anything to either side to cite somebody, Max Planck was wrong, Einstein was wrong, Isaac Newton was wrong, But go ahead, Jim.
I'm going to let you pick apart a lot of these arguments, but the one thing that caught my attention as a parent, I have a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, and often as parents, we think it is our job to, we bring up our children, we educate them. But I will tell you, from having two amazing children, I learned as much from them oftentimes. And the fact that, I think it's important you listen to your son and you have a conversation, because a lot of parents, it can be very unhealthy when you have that view that you're going to burn in hell forever. And I've seen parents abandon their kids. And that it can be so harmful. So, and I know you had those thoughts, but from what I hear, I'm hoping that, you're actually having a dialogue, and it's okay if you don't agree. And that, most importantly of all these things is that this is your son and your family, and that is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And so I want to thank you for that. Now, some of these arguments are where, while you're listening, it sounds like you're on this journey and went this path, and you went off the path quite a bit. And I'm going to let Matt talk about some of these arguments and fallacies of, you can't say they're all true, like, validating
or all equal.
Or all equal. That's just not possible. They're saying different things and there's just no way.
Yeah.
Matt, take it away and have fun.
So the first thing was, you mentioned a book called Caesar's Rome. Are you sure it wasn't a book called Caesar's Messiah?
Oh, yes, that's it.
Okay. My opinion, and it's the opinion of some others, is that book is conspiracy theorist garbage. And I really, it's a mistake to portray Christianity as if it were invented in the 4th century by the Pope and the Masons. The fact that there are similarities in stories doesn't lead to the conclusion that, I think that's Atwill, but it doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusion it gets to. But in any case, what it led you to was this notion that all religions are equal. And this is a common thing where people are trying to say, religions are just man's failed attempt to all describe the same thing. But the truth is that the varying religions make very different claims about things. Some of them have similar claims, and that's not surprising. The notion that there is a God is a natural transition from, hey, I'm a person and I have these capabilities, to maybe there's a super person who has better capabilities, to, well, then maybe there must be a maximally super person that has these capabilities. It's a natural progression, but that doesn't mean that it's remotely true. And I have a problem saying that all religions are equal or whatever, because the nature of their claims aren't the same, and there are things we know. We know that Scientology is an invented fiction by L. Ron Hubbard. We know that Mormonism is a lie constructed by Joseph Smith, a con artist. So I can't put those on the same footing as other religions, because I also believe that there are other religions that weren't done in the sense of intentionally constructing a lie. Instead, for me, it's more plausible that human beings tried to solve problems, and they told stories, and they made mistakes, and the ones that were most popular and least subject to being proven false are the ones that persist today. If you have a religion that says, lightning is, Odin, chucking electricity down, well, okay, that could still be the case, but we understand enough about how electricity works, how lightning works, that seems to be a really kind of ridiculous claim. Whereas if you say, oh, well, we don't know anything beyond the Planck time, and it seems philosophically intuitional that something must have occurred to start off Big Bang cosmology, or whatever cosmological model is correct. And, when Max Planck looks at it and says that, we have to infer a mind behind this, I think he's just wrong. I think what the only reason that he's willing to infer a mind is because someone has already asserted a mind. And so when we're looking for what is the explanation for any phenomena, we make a list of all the candidate explanations, and then we try to evaluate how likely they are. You know, if there's a blood stain on my kitchen floor, is it more likely that somebody cut themselves while preparing food, or that a serial killer came in and slaughtered somebody and then drug the body off? We know about the likelihood of those two events, and then we reach a more probable conclusion. The problem is, what if the third option is God placed blood on the floor of my kitchen just to fuck with me? Now, that's a completely unfalsifiable proposition. There's no way for me to show that that did not happen. And for somebody who thinks that a God is absolutely real and that a God may do this sort of thing to me, specifically for some purpose I can't understand, then for them, that's going to appear as if it's the most plausible explanation, despite the fact that we don't have any evidence for a God. We don't have anything to show how probable it is that a God would do something like this. So in your case, moving from Catholicism away to, well, all these religions are equal, or perhaps equally wrong or similarly wrong, whatever, but still believing in some base theism. The question that I have is, what convinces you that there's some God behind it? Because you ruled out a number of specific types of gods. Like, it seemed like you were almost arguing for a deistic view where there's a God that started it all off but does not intervene. And I'm curious, do you think there's a God that intervenes in nature or that intervenes in a personal sense? And what is it about, what is the case that keeps you convinced after abandoning religious doctrine that there's still a God?
Well, I referenced and I apologize for talking so fast.
Me too.
My son was texting me. My son was texting me, Dad, you're talking too fast. So
it's probably a good idea. It keeps me from interrupting.
I think it goes back to when I was a kid, and I walked out. I couldn't speak. I was still in diapers, and I remember walking out the front porch, and then walking out into the world, and the thought, without words, I didn't know what words were, didn't know how to speak, but I knew and felt that I was a creature within this place, whatever it was. I didn't know what the world was. I didn't know what the sky was. I couldn't even formulate it, but I just thought, I'm part of this. And as I look at, quantum mechanics.
Oh, boy.
And, it looks like that God is holding us all together, or a force is holding us all together.
Okay, those are two different things. So a force. A force is very ill-defined, and a force doesn't necessarily have agency or any of the things that we attribute to God. But what I've heard so far is that you had self-awareness and no understanding of language, and I'm presuming at this time that you also had no critical thinking skills and investigative skills, and yet you reached a conclusion about a deity at that point that has just lingered with you your entire life.
I don't know if I would even say it was a deity, other than a feeling that I was a creature within this planet and space. So
do you think that's a good way to reach conclusions?
I think it's a good intuition. I think we all have intuition.
Is it possible to have a personal experience and be wrong?
Well, of course it's possible.
Then is that a good methodology to use to come up with something?
Is it possible to have an intuition that's not correct?
Of course it's possible to have an intuition and be wrong. Okay,
so how do we go about finding out whether or not an intuition is correct or not?
Well, that's what I've done the research on.
Okay.
Where I'm kind of pointing to, quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics has nothing to do with a God. There's no God in math. There's no God in the calculations. The people who best understand quantum mechanics certainly tend to not believe in a God. But if you begin with this intuition that there is a God and you see something within quantum mechanics, something like, spooky action at a distance, now you have a ready potential explanation that is consistent with that observation, but is not necessarily tied to that observation. So the fact that there are things within quantum mechanics that we don't understand particularly well that might be consistent with God proposals, and the fact that you're quick to put God and force in the same category. We need something where you define a God distinctly and show a demonstration of why this God exists or likely exists. And it can't just be, oh, it seems like it would be a good explanation for this thing we've observed, because that's what we've done forever. That's called God of the gaps.
I think it kind of goes back to our conscious minds and our awareness.
Okay.
So, this consciousness, and there are plenty of studies out there where, people that have died have come back and have seen themselves on the operating table. People that have intuition with what's happening with other people if they pass away, and just the overall connection. I think that might be.
So first of all, consciousness isn't explained or understood. Second of all, near-death experiences are near death and not death. And what we know about how the mind works is that a mind that is in the process of dying, starved of oxygen and other things, may not be functioning correctly, and that what most likely happens is that when somebody loses consciousness on an operating table and then comes to at a later time where they have been revived, what does the brain do? It tries to create a story that describes that missing period or that period of confusion. But even if somebody were accurately describing, let's say, a trip to heaven, which has been faked and admitted to be faked even within the last year or so, but also people tend to see the religious iconography that they grow up with. Catholics tend to see Catholic iconography, and Baptists tend to see Baptist iconography, and you very rarely get some crossover. You certainly aren't going to get it where people haven't been, exposed at all to these things. But at the end of the day, let's say that Jim dies tomorrow on the table. And after a fairly long time, let's say longer than anybody else, he is now revived, and he comes to me and he's like, Matt, let me tell you what happened while I was out. Now, my first thing is, how the hell do you know what happened while you were out? The most reasonable conclusion is your brain made something up after the fact. But setting aside that, I don't want to jump to conclusions. And he describes a trip to his version of paradise. Now, let's say that he actually did experience all that. How does it in any way confirm that what he experienced is in fact real? And if he experienced that, how do we determine that the best explanation for that is that there is a God showing him a paradise and not some other explanation?
Well, I think it's just faith. It's your belief. It's your personal belief.
Okay. Is there any position that you couldn't just take on faith? Couldn't I think white people are better than black people just on faith?
Well, I don't know if I would agree.
You don't think I could take that on faith?
I think you could. I don't know if I like your example, is what I'm saying.
Of course you don't. That's why I pick it.
I think you could pick I could believe that this glass is the God of the universe.
Now, is it possible? Stop. Stop. We already agreed that intuitions can be wrong. And yet if you have to take an intuition on faith, then it would seem to follow, and I would hope that you would agree, that it's possible that you could take an intuition on faith that is in fact wrong, right?
Of course you can.
Okay. Now, if faith can lead you to correct and incorrect conclusions, then we should be able to agree that faith is not a reliable method for discovering the truth, correct?
But we're both expressing faith. You're saying you have a faith that there is no God.
No, first of all, stop, Tim, stop. Seriously, I promise I'm trying to help you. I am not claiming that there are no gods, and I'm not claiming that that position, to whatever extent I have it, is based on faith. What I asked was, if it's possible for faith to affirm an incorrect intuition, then doesn't that mean that faith is not a reliable path to truth? That was the question.
I know that's the question, but you're saying that faith.
There's no but. This is a yes. This is a yes or no question.
Isn't the atheist position?
No. And the atheist. No, stop, Tim. I swear. The atheist position is completely irrelevant to this conversation, just like the position on Bigfoot is irrelevant to the conversation, just like the position on God is irrelevant to this conversation. I'm talking about the methodology. If faith can lead you to true conclusions and false conclusions, then isn't faith an unreliable method for reaching the truth? That's it. It's an abstract about the methodology.
If you are basing your belief on observable science, then I would have to agree. But if God exists, and if God exists outside of space-time, how could you ever conclude or be able to prove that God exists or doesn't exist?
You can't, and that's why you could never be justified in believing in a God. If your view is that you now believe in a God that could never be proved, then you are admitting you are engaged in an irrational act. You are affirming that you believe something is true and that you believe that you couldn't possibly be justified in believing that it's true. And the telling part of this is this was a very simple question that had nothing to do with God, no God, Bigfoot, whatever. It was intuitions can be right or wrong. And if you believe in intuition based on faith, it can still be right or wrong. And doesn't that mean that faith is not a reliable mechanism for discovering truth? And there's one and only one correct answer to that, and that is yes, but whatever is in your head would not allow you to say yes, even though you know that's the only answer, because you know that the follow-up question to that is you just justified your intuition based on faith, and now you've acknowledged that faith is not a reliable path to truth. So how then can you justify your belief? And something inside your head knows that that's not the case, which is why you wouldn't answer that simple, obvious question. Where am I wrong?
Okay.
Where am I at all wrong?
I think based on logic, based on observable science, there's no way to prove that God exists within this space-time if God exists outside of space-time.
So doesn't that mean you would need some method other than science in order to have a justified belief of that?
I don't know what method that would be.
I don't either. But you provided a method, which is faith, which I pointed out is unreliable. So now we've eliminated faith as a good method to tell the truth. So we would need another method to tell the truth. And if you don't know what that method is, then isn't that an admission that you now believe something for which you have no reliable method to know that it's real?
I believe something that I don't have science at the current moment to prove.
Okay, we've established that you don't have science for it. What do you have? And how is it a reliable pathway to truth?
Just an intuition and faith.
Yep. And if we would agree that an intuition and faith does not necessarily lead to truth, and we agree on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you don't have a reliable method for your belief, which means you cannot reasonably hold it.
But on the flip side of that, science starts off with a idea,
Yes.
a hypothesis, a belief, and then they go through testing.
No.
And they go through measurement, and they go through and calculate.
Okay, I just want to correct this because you equated hypothesis with belief. The way we would typically describe this is that there's some observation, we need an explanation. We come up with a hypothesis. It's not a belief. It is a suspicion. It is a proposition about a possible explanation, and then we go and do the testing to confirm whether or not we have good reason to accept that this is a likely explanation. And then when we reach the point where this becomes a theory, which is the highest standard in science, that is not an assertion that we are absolutely certain or that this is the truth. All it means is this is the best supported model that best explains the observation and makes predictions in such a way that we can be reasonably confident that it's likely to be true. It's not an assertion about truth. But all of that is secondary. Because if we spend time talking about how science would go about testing things, and you've already said that science can't confirm God, then it's pointless to talk about science if we're talking about whether or not somebody can rationally believe in a God. So we would need another mechanism.
Yeah, and I don't know what that mechanism would be. And
I don't either.
Whether we believe it or not, I mean, don't you believe that there is a truth out there? That either God exists, or God does not exist. And I
Correct.
I'm choosing to believe in God because in the end,
you don't choose what you believe. You do not choose what you believe. You are either convinced or you're not, and you can be convinced for good reasons or bad reasons. But while I would agree that it is true that either some God exists or no God exists, that those are direct logical negations, the proposition is is belief in that there is a God warranted? And my answer is no, it's not warranted. That does not mean that belief that there's not a God is warranted, because that proposition may be unfalsifiable. You could come up with a God description that there's no way to prove it's false, and that means that you could not have a reasonable justification for accepting that. You would basically be claiming to have falsified the unfalsifiable in much the same way that you, Tim, have essentially claimed that you have detected the undetectable. If God is essentially undetectable, and your method for detecting God is this unreliable thing of I have an intuition and faith, then you're essentially claiming you've detected the undetectable. I'm not asserting there are no gods. I'm certainly not asserting it with any degree of confidence or anything like that. My position is that the God claim has not demonstrated and met its burden of proof. The null hypothesis, the thing that we start with, is kind of like a foundation. It's like you're innocent until proven guilty. We begin by assuming you're innocent, and we have to build a burden of proof to show that you are in fact guilty. Similarly, if you view God as being accused of existing, we begin that God does not exist until such time as there's a demonstration of it. And when there is, then belief is warranted. And if that demonstration doesn't come, then we have to vote not guilty, which is not a statement that God doesn't exist. It's a statement that we have not demonstrated that God exists. That's the difference. Now, for some gods, for some God definitions, I absolutely believe they don't exist, and I think I can make a great case for it, including most versions of the Christian God.
Tim mentioned he was reading books, but some of the conspiracy theory books, as you call it, Matt. Is there books you would recommend to take him down a path of some of these things that you would recommend? And Tim, would you read them? Or if we send them to you off air, either way, if we don't come up on the spot, would you actually read them?
The first two books that I recommend to everybody, even when they develop a more specific interest, there are other books to go to. But the first two books I always recommend. One book is a book called Inaccuracies by John Allen Paulos. It has nothing to do with religion or that much about philosophy. It's about how bad we are at math and how prone we are to misunderstanding statistics. And it is a good starter book to kind of retrain your brain to be suspicious when you hear statistics and numbers like, the odds of RNA producing it or evolving out of nothing are 1 to the 10th of blah, 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 blah. And it allows people, it's called Innumeracy. The author is John Allen Paulos. It's one of the best life-changing books I've ever seen or read. It reminds me a lot of how much my life was changed by like James Burke and Connections and The Day the Universe Changed, even more than Cosmos. The one book on religion that I tend to recommend to everybody because I think it's really good. There's one problem chapter in it, but Guy P. Harrison, who's the author, and I spoke about it, and he understood why I objected. But Guy P. Harrison has a book called 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, and each one's just a short little essay where you present a reason, and then Guy offers his thoughts on it. It's really good. It's accessible to anybody, and it will help people narrow down their focus on where they want to go further. Do you need to go read The God Delusion, or are you more focused on the science stuff, and then you go to Jerry Coyne's, Why Evolution is True, and but if you're not as big on books, there are countless, video sources. Not only my own Atheist Debates project where I go through stuff, but there's great, like the William Lane Craig versus Sean Carroll debate is really good because you have an actual physicist pointing out that Bill Craig is not a physicist, and then that he's misusing a model. There's lots of great resources out there. But the key thing is to start training critical thinking skills and skepticism to get a foundation behind logical fallacies and syllogisms and why we need those structures. Because a lot of people think that if an argument is fallacious, that means the conclusion is false. And that's not the case. What it means is if an argument is fallacious, that you cannot be confident the conclusion is true. However, if an argument's not fallacious, if it has a proper structure, if you accept the premises, you have to accept the conclusion. And when you come into conflict with that, you get into sorry for the technical terms, but a reductio ad absurdum, where you're like, wait a minute, I don't accept this conclusion. That must mean that one of my premises is wrong. So if you begin with God exists as a premise, and it leads you to a conclusion that contradicts some observation, then that, if the conclusion is true, then one of the premises is wrong, and it may be this one about God existing. But those are the two books I tend to recommend.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on the show, and I'll just make one final statement, and I'll go.
Okay.
The way I can just summarize it is, it's like I've been invited to a party, and I'm in the person that threw the party. I'm in their house. It's a beautiful house, and I feel that if I don't at least acknowledge the person that invited me to the party, it's a disservice. And for me to say and to conclude, I just could not conclude, because there is, as we already said, there's no way to prove it or disprove it. So I guess I lean on the side of believing there is a God, because if God exists and I'm a creature of God, then in the end, the truth will be revealed. And I'd rather live my life at least being thankful that I was invited to the party. And with that,
So let me give you one question to think about, Tim, if you're there. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. What if you think you're at a party, but you're actually just standing out on the street with everybody else and nobody invited you there? How do you prove that you are at a party and were invited to the party? Not just that you feel you were invited to a party, because what you're describing is as if you were invited to the party of life. And as far as I can tell, the universe is entirely indifferent about us. I wasn't invited to this party of life. I'm just here on the street with everybody else. And sometimes we gather together in clusters and have fun, but that doesn't mean it was a structured, invited party. And so finding...
I think that just goes back to the origin of how you're feeling about it, and thinking about it, and how I'm feeling about it, even though...
It does get to the fact that we feel differently about it, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
There should be a way to demonstrate that we are at a party that we were invited to. If I've ever been actually invited to a party, I have the invitation. And everybody else at the party says, hey, isn't this a good party? And we all have invitations. So there's a way to demonstrate whether or not you were invited to a party. And if you can't demonstrate that, maybe you weren't.
And I believe that it is demonstrated with the fact that we're here, that we exist, that we have a conscious mind, that we, going through, we haven't even gotten into the whole evolution.
Well, that's like saying that you believe you're at a party because I'm surrounded by people and we're all laughing and having a good time. That doesn't mean I'm at a party. The fact that those things are consistent with a party doesn't mean that it is a party.
That I'm surrounded by a party with people, that this is not my place. I didn't create it. I didn't create my body. I didn't create my mind. I didn't create any of this. My parents didn't do it.
Yeah, but you're presuming that there's a who that created these things. When all of the evidence points to natural processes constructed these things. We are living things. We are the product of our parents.
But we have conscious minds.
So do my parents. That's why I have a conscious mind, because I'm the descendant of creatures that had conscious minds.
Tim, I'll leave you with this. Yeah. Listen to your kids. And the fact that they got you... And the fact that they got you to call in is a huge first step. And the fact that you were willing to call in and you made the premise that, hey, my kids wanted me to come in for their amusement, thinking, that you would be ridiculed, which obviously you weren't. And we had a really good conversation. So I will commend you for that. But I hope you continue this journey and listen to your kids.
Your kids need to know that you are in the top 1% of people who have ever called the show as far as having a good conversation.
Yeah. And maybe we'll meet at a later date. And if you go down this path, I think your views will be very much different a year from now. And I would love to hear from you then.
And if they're not, we'd still love to hear from you. So thanks for your call, Tim. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Messenger.
Yeah, those are the kind of conversations that I like.
That was a good conversation.
It's really frustrating. People often wonder, like when I first found my way out, I was looking for the silver bullet argument that would put religion and superstition and supernatural stuff just to bed. Boom, we're done with that. Matt has solved and fixed the world. Aren't I a fucking genius? Turns out there's nothing at all like that, because people believe for different reasons. People are going to give it up for different reasons, and some people are different stages. And so that point where it was like, okay, we agree intuition isn't reliable, and we agree that faith isn't reliable. So doesn't that mean that doesn't that mean that faith is not a reliable path to truth? And the fact that couldn't get an immediate yes told me a great deal about exactly where Tim was. And this is the thing about religion, is that religions that have survived, that are incredibly popular today, are the ones that don't make too many falsifiable claims. And they're the ones that have built-in protective mechanisms where they are intuitionally the case. well, I can't explain consciousness, therefore God. I can't explain life, therefore God. I can't explain the origin of the universe, therefore God. And if God is there as this panacea that serves as a potential explanation for anything, it's frustrating to me that they don't recognize that, in fact, it explains nothing.
And it takes time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And Tim's going down this path. I remember, my wife, we were talking to a priest. She knew nothing about religion. We're getting married Catholic. The priest is explaining the Eucharist to her. And she's like, you want me to eat who and drink what?
Yeah.
Like, that was my moment of doubt.
I'm not joining your cannibal cult.
Right. And they actually asked her not to come back.
Yeah.
But that was my moment of doubt. But from that point where I was like, I believe crazy shit, it took me 10 years to become an atheist.
Yeah.
That transition. It takes time. It's not this, I can point back to that one thing that got me doubting. Just like Tim's one thing where he had a conversation with his kid.
And it's not even a line in the sand, because it can be that you maybe stop believing this, but you're not necessarily sure where you are. And then
I went from Catholic to Christian to deist, a little Wicca in there somewhere for a few minutes. Eventually to agnostic to where I'm like, wait a minute. I thought about it one day. I'm like, no, I am an atheist. But it took time.
And next week you'll be a Satanist.
I don't know about that. But, reading some of the books, watching the Atheist Experience, and also when, for me, when I start watching this show, I was like, I know that, I think these things are wrong, but I couldn't articulate my arguments.
Yeah.
So I would watch this show so that I could have conversations with friends, with family, and have them well. So, because they would say things, and I'm like, I don't know. And this was a great way to have some of those conversations.
That's an incredibly frustrating answer to people who think they do know.
And it's a great answer.
It's the right answer quite often. The debate that I did 2 weeks ago with Braxton Hunter, there was a gentleman, the very first person who stood up and asked a question was basically very frustrated that the subject of the debate was, does the Christian God exist? And Braxton's answer was yes, and my answer was, I don't know. And it wasn't the starting point. My thing is that I think that I can disprove any religion, definitely any religion that has a reliance on the concept of a soul, which I did not do in that debate, but I will be hitting it in the next one. I think, divine hiddenness and inconsistent revelation's all there. But this kid got up and was like, do you answer with a dogmatic no or a maybe? And I was like, I thought I addressed this. I answer with I don't know. And then, atheism is the assertion that no gods exist. And I was like, no, words have different usages. And I'm trying to explain to him the same thing that I did today. And he's rolling his eyes and dancing around and just giving me attitude. And I know I got a little pissy. And I tried to explain this, and I was like, did you just suggest that I'm wrong about atheism? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, well, having hosted the show for the year and done all this, I'm trying to explain to you the word has different usages, and you're telling me I'm wrong. And he's like, I don't care how you define it. And that's when I said, well, then we're done. Let's move on. Why the hell are you at my event? Why on earth would you come to listen to me talk? And then when I try to explain to you how we're viewing something differently and how I'm using it, I don't care how you define it. Well, I don't care what the rest of your fucking question was, because it's time to move on. But it's frustrating because I saw this stuff again, and what I recognized from him, which I wish I would have handled slightly differently, but it's at the end of the debate and whatever, was this is another protective mechanism. He has in his head a very straw-man-y version of atheism that he thinks he can knock down, and when somebody presents any other version of atheism, that's incredibly frustrating. Because, wait a minute, Matt just said he doesn't know. That means he's an agnostic, not an atheist, or whatever. As if that fundamentally changes anything about the debate. Whether or not what label you put on me, or maybe I was a true, pure Huxleyan agnostic, where my answer is I don't know. If I defended that position the entire debate, then what use is it for you to get up and say, well, you don't qualify as an atheist under my definition. Okay, I don't care how you define atheism. Oh, now all of a sudden that takes on a different context. But anyway, we've got a bunch of calls to get through and not loads of time. So we have Taylor in California. Thank you for waiting. You're on with Matt and Jim Helton. Or Matt Dillahunty and Jim Helton.
Hey, Matt. Thank you guys for having me on. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. That's Steve McCrae from the Non Sequitur Show. He has a really good show.
No, Steve and I are not going to have a conversation around this for various reasons, but.
Oh yeah, I like his show. His show's really cool. It's got flat earthers, and I enjoy watching it. Well, I'm a Bible believing Christian to the heart, and I am faith based. And I was listening to what you were saying, and I agree with you that faith isn't always a source of truth.
Okay.
You need inclinations, right? In the Bible, it says persuasion. We are persuaded. We know who.
Persuasion is a
persuaded.
technique. I'm a magician, and I can persuade people of all kinds of things. Con artists are very persuasive. What we need is evidence, not persuasion.
that's exactly
It is the evidence that does the persuasion.
Yes.
Okay.
And the God of the Bible claims in the book of Romans, all right?
Well, hang on.
Because we have known.
Hang on.
God. Go ahead.
So there's a problem with that phrasing. The God of the Bible claims in the book of Romans is an assertion that you have a book and that this God is saying it. Instead, it would be better to say the book of Romans says.
Yeah, claims. All right.
And are you going to Romans 1:9 or?
No, I'm going to Romans 1:19.
1:19. Sorry, that's the evidence of all things. Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's not the evidence, but it's the claim that he has evidence for him.
Sure.
Because we have known God manifest in them, the believers, and God showed it unto them. For the invisible things from creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even the eternal power of the Godhead. So he's saying that we can witness him in creation.
Yes.
Now,
and do you understand that this is a fallacious assertion because it's circular? The observation of nature leads to a couple of possibilities. One, that nature was created, and two, that nature evolved, that it wasn't created or did not have an intelligent creator. And when Romans states that for the invisible things of his nature are evident in nature, that is an assertion that basically that argument is look at the trees. You look at a tree and you know there's a God, except that is a fallacious argument.
Yeah, no, I'm not making that argument at all. I'm saying that.
But that's what Romans is making. You're making what?
Well, I'm saying, right, we look at the God by the whole Bible, meaning that if he has to be the way he describes, he's a borderline personality, if you will. He's somebody that loves you, and then 2 minutes later, he hates you.
Yes.
He gives you the keys to the car, and you get in the car, and he says, if you go to a party, right, if you don't just go straight to work and come back, I'm going to ground you. And then you get in the car, there's a full tank of gas.
That's in the
And
Bible.
he's like, oh, yeah, and I'm going to be gone for a couple days. See, so we have a God that will give you life.
It's curious to me.
So fragile, you could die at any moment.
It's curious to me that you want to take it on the whole character of God as described in the Bible, and then you acknowledge that the God of the Bible is described with massively different and conflicting character traits.
That would be a borderline personality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I believe.
Okay, so your God is occasionally a dick, and you're okay with it.
Why not?
Okay.
If I have no choice in the matter.
Here's the more important question: dick or not, how do you know your God's real?
I can see this in manifest reality. Like if I acted like God, right?
No, I would know my dad. I would know my dad is real when he manifests in reality by handing me the car keys. If you're going to use an analogy or a metaphoric analysis like that, you need to have some demonstration of how you know that there is a God handing you the metaphorical car keys.
All right. My God says he's invisible.
How do you know your God says no? When Taylor, when and where did God say he's invisible?
God, all right, you're right. We'll say it's off the Bible.
Why should I care what the Bible says?
Because that's my God, the God I believe in.
How is that not a circular argument?
I don't get your point.
Sure.
I believe in the God of the Bible. So
you believe in the God. You believe in the God.
Or not,
Taylor, I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. The Bible says something, and you believe it because you believe that it's God saying it. Right?
I believe that the Bible equates reality. When we read the Bible,
I don't know what the hell that means or how it's relevant to this question. So let me try again. You believe the Bible, correct?
Yes, I do.
Every bit of it?
Every single word.
And so if God commands something in the Bible, it's morally correct?
Absolutely not.
Wait.
Absolutely not.
So God can command things in the Bible that are immoral?
Absolutely. It says that Isaiah 45:7, he creates good and evil.
That's not what that passage means.
I bring the light, I bring the dark, I do the good.
I know what the passage says, and I know atheists use that all the time to say that God is the creator of good and evil. But if you actually study theology on every major Christian and Jewish understanding of that. That is not what that passage means. But okay, so
you know something I don't.
Yeah, I know lots of things you don't. But here's the thing: you have and I'm sure
the God I believe in.
I'm sure that you know lots of things that I don't too. Let's focus on what's relevant. So you have a particularly esoteric view of that verse, and so you have a God that is some bipolar dick who is good and evil. Cool. All I'm concerned about is how would we go about having a reasonable demonstration that this God is real? And your answer was that you believe the Bible. And when I asked, why should I care what the Bible has to say? Your thing is because it's from God. And then you would need to demonstrate why it's from God, and you can't use the Bible as confirmation of that, or it becomes a circular argument, which is fallacious.
Well, I'm not stating as fact that the Bible is the Word of God. I'm saying I'm persuaded to believe the Bible is the Word of God.
Okay.
Meaning, if you could prove, if this could be proven to me, that the Bible is not the Word of God, then I would have no God.
Well, you have set up, Taylor, you have set up the most unfalsifiable proposition of all time for your view of Christianity. Because the type of things that we would use to show that the Bible was perhaps not the Word of God would be to show that something the Bible said is inconsistent with the character that we would expect from God. But your God can be anything: good, evil, nice, dick, whatever. And so there's no way to show that beyond showing a technical failure, which I guess your God could be technically wrong about stuff too, right?
Yeah, no, he can't lie.
He cannot lie?
God can't do. He cannot lie. He could not decide for you whether or not, he could not decide whether Adam was going to take the apple. He did not know whether Adam was going to take the apple.
So your God doesn't know the future, so how could there possibly be prophecy in the Bible?
Well, prophecy, he's equating. He knows the conclusion of what will be and what will be.
You can't. So he didn't know that Adam was going to eat the apple, but he knew that mankind was going to be sinful and fallen, and that he would need to send Jesus. That's bizarrely absurd.
He didn't know that. That dispensed over time, as the Bible shows. There's all kinds of things God didn't know.
Okay, you got a weak ass God, dude. Now, how do you prove he's real?
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we had an all good God, that would falsify the Bible. If we had an all bad God, that would falsify the Bible. We got a God that does both good and evil, and there's only one. So he's responsible for everything, life and everything.
So your God is
killed everybody.
But if your God is on par, with a coin toss, then how do you distinguish randomness to say that there's a God involved?
Randomness, what do you mean?
Well, your God can do whatever he wants. So let's say something good happens, people can credit God. Something bad happens, people could credit God, right?
Yes.
How do we tell when God has actually been involved in something or not, if it can go either way?
Oh, no, he's in all. In order for him to be, he's involved in everything.
Okay, so he was involved in Adam eating the apple, and yet he didn't know that was going to happen?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he's involved in decisions that he doesn't know about.
No, he's not involved in decisions he doesn't know about. He gives you, you're allowed the opportunity. He doesn't know you. He created you personally in the image, right? So that means you have the same interest as good and evil.
Since we're short on time and because I have a guest, I'm just going to put a pin in this. And you have propositioned a confused, non-standard, self-contradictory God, and you're okay with it, which is how you can't show that there's a contradiction. So you're right. There's no way for me to disprove your God. When you figure out how you could possibly prove your God, give us a call back. I don't know how you can.
I got nothing.
My God could land on heads or tails, but every time that coin lands, no matter what it is, I know that God was involved in that. Woo-woo. Good job. I don't know. We'll go on. We've got Otangelo in Brazil. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Good night, Jim. I'm following your show, and I have seen several episodes of yours. I am an evangelical Christian for 34 years, and I basically endorse the exact opposite view that you have. In my view, the existence of God is impossible. The non-existence of God is impossible. But before I justify that, I would like to ask you following. Let's suppose that you...
I want to make sure I understand. You believe the God because of the impossibility of the contrary.
I believe that it is not possible God not to exist.
Okay, we're going to have to define some things, but you said before you demonstrated that, you wanted to do what?
I would like to exemplify why I believe this, okay?
Well, isn't that this? If you're getting ready to... wow, this is... You say that you believe in God because it's impossible for God to not exist. But before you explain this, you want to tell us why you believe it.
Yes. Okay.
How is that different? No. This is an incredibly interesting sticking point for me, because if I say I believe that a God doesn't exist, but before I tell you why, let me tell you why. So how about you define the terms and then just tell us why?
Okay. I believe that the inexistence of God is impossible.
You need to define God.
Just as an intelligent designer.
Intelligent designer of what, and how intelligent?
Creator of the universe, life, biodiversity, everything. Everything physical.
So God is an intelligence that is sufficiently intelligent to create everything.
Yes.
Okay, and you think it is impossible that that's not true?
Exactly, yes.
What would possibly show that you were wrong? If we were to show, for example, a natural process that accounted for the diversity of life, wouldn't that then show you were wrong?
If you can show, I would like not to come to the cosmological argument about the nothing and so on. I would like to exemplify to you why I believe what I believe, but not with the cosmological argument.
I didn't mention the cosmological argument. I was talking about life. Cosmological argument about the origin of the cosmos.
Now let's go to life.
Well, I don't necessarily need to go to life either. You have proposed a God that is capable of everything, creating anything that actually exists. And you say it's impossible for that to not be true. And all I'm saying is, how do you come to the conclusion that it is impossible for it to...
Because nothing has no power to do something.
Okay,
something
stop. First of all, your assertion that something cannot come from nothing is something you cannot demonstrate.
I don't have to demonstrate.
Yes, you do. You don't just get to assert it and keep going. Yes, sir. You don't get to say something can't come from...
You know why?
Stop, Otan. Stop. I'm explaining why you cannot merely assert that. Of course you can say it. I can say the moon is made of green cheese. You don't get to assert that something cannot come from nothing and expect someone to accept that until you demonstrate it. And you have no nothing with which to demonstrate this.
No, you are wrong, Matt.
Okay, where's your nothing? Where's your nothing?
Listen,
where's your nothing? You answer the questions I ask, or we're moving on. We're almost out of time. Where's the nothing that you were able to experiment with to show that something can't come from it?
Absolutely nothing is by definition the absence of anything.
I agree. I agree that is the definition of nothing. But you know what the definition of nothing... Stop, and let me finish. If the definition of nothing is that it doesn't have anything, then that's fine. But until the definition of nothing is something cannot come from it, you have work to do to prove that assertion.
No.
Yes. Bye. If the definition of peanut butter is a creamy substance with chunks made of peanuts, and it has to be chunky or you're a heretic. You're just correct. You're wrong about peanut
Absolutely.
butter. But if that's the definition of peanut butter, you don't get to say a jelly and peanut butter sandwich can't come from peanut butter because peanut butter is defined as a creamy substance made of peanuts. You only get to claim that it's true by definition if the definition of peanut butter is something from which a peanut butter and jelly sandwich cannot come. By the way, scientists aren't necessarily proposing something from nothing. That's an actual absurdity. There were actually problems with the question I asked you that I was hoping you could see if you could identify, but you just kept going right down that track. Nothing isn't a thing, and trying to define nothing as a thing is already a mistake. It's like trying to talk about before time. Hey, what happened before time? Nothing. Because happenings, occurrences, are temporal. They require time. They occur over some period of time. So to say what happened before time is already nonsensical. It's like saying, how did peanut butter create the universe? Oh, well, you're assuming. And you're assuming that there is, in fact, a creator. When you define God as that being which is capable of creating anything, you don't just get to say it's impossible for that to not be true. You have to show why that is, in fact, necessarily true. And if you can't do that for your something from nothing claim, then I have no confidence that you're going to continue on beyond that.
Can we get a call to defend creamy peanut butter and pulp-free orange juice and just rip it apart?
Yeah, oh my gosh.
I mean,
you can take your fake pulp-free orange juice and give yourself an enema with it because there's pulp in orange juice. No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's see if we can get to a couple more real quick. We've got Jeff in Florida. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, Matt. I'm so glad that you guys started off with the in-group, out-group thing because that ties into really the main point I wanted to make. Actually, if you mind, that's actually monumentally more important than what I was going to say. So you mind if I just take a second to talk about, motivated reasoning and in-group, out-group?
Yeah, I mean, we're over time, but, if that's what you want to do and keep it short, go for it.
Well, right. So in-group, out-group, you guys mentioned the study, and they've actually done studies about, how motivated reasoning plays a huge role in-group, out-group. They give...
You might want to define motivated reasoning for people.
Right. So they give a study to Republicans and Democrats, and if the Republicans believe the study came from another Republican, they view it one way, much, much more favorably.
It's a fancy way of saying that we have internal biases.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually tried calling in before, and it was a complete disaster. You guys misunderstood that you thought I was a theist, and I was calling to defend. I was calling to point out a bad argument that I thought you made, and basically, you guys thought that I was a theist, and
which guys? Because Jim wasn't here.
This was with Matt, right?
Okay. And what was the argument?
I want to take a recent example of what I thought was a really bad argument, and I think this is an example of if you had the idea that the other person on the end of the call was an atheist or a agnostic, then you have a different opinion. The outcome would be different. So what I was sort of astounded with was that, the guy defined, so this is a theist talking, the guy defined naturalism as all that exists is studyable by the natural sciences. And in my view, that's, I know a lot about methodological naturalism versus philosophical naturalism. I follow the Dover intelligent design trial very closely. To me, that's a completely natural definition. But you just sort of interrupted and said, well, that's the same as methodological naturalism. But you said he was conflating methodological naturalism with philosophical naturalism, and then you said you gave a definition of only natural things exist, which is sort of
we have to stop. We have to stop, Jeff. I don't remember the details of this call. I have no confidence that you're getting it right. I have no way to assess it without actually listening to the call. Instead of trying to replay a call in your head and tell me what went wrong, just see if we agree or disagree on a thing, because is it possible that I misspoke? Sure. Is it possible that you misunderstood? Sure. But, here's a call where you said this and he kind of said this, and I think you got this. That does nobody any good.
Okay, so this is why I think it's important. You were defining naturalism in a way that excluded like most. Basically, what you did was you made.
Why are we still talking about what I did when I specifically said, let's stop talking about what I did and see if we can agree?
Okay. So
let me make this easy. Let me make this easy. Naturalism is a word that is used and tossed around, and yet there are multiple different usages of it. There is the notion of philosophical naturalism, which is basically an assertion that only the natural world exists. And then there's methodological naturalism, which is science's recognition that we cannot investigate and confirm the supernatural, so we don't get to posit supernatural explanations. It is not claiming there's nothing supernatural. It's saying we're not going to include potential supernatural events until such time as we have a way to actually include them methodologically to show that there's something supernatural, and that's when it gets involved with science. That's it. That's the difference between philosophical and methodological naturalism. What did I get wrong?
The reason it's important to get this right is, like you said, that naturalism.
What did I get wrong? What did I get wrong just then?
Okay. What did you get wrong just then?
Just now, and what I just said. That's the most important thing, right?
I thought the important thing was correcting the record, but
no. Okay, you're not listening to me. I said it's a waste of time for us to go through what you think I said in a call versus what I'm not going to remember about what I said in a call because I don't have the call here to review. But let's see if we can figure out if we agree. So I gave you definitions so that I can figure out if we're in agreement. Then you can send me an email with a specific show and the timestamp, and I can go back and look and say, yep, I fucked that up, and offer a correction. Or I can go back and say, nope, this caller completely misunderstood what I was saying. Or there's a third option with something else. So all I want to know is what I just explained to you about naturalism in agreement with your understanding?
More or less, but with caveats.
Are the caveats relevant?
Yes, they are, because you're.
And what are they? Real quickly, like what are they?
The basic ontology that conflicts with what I take to be your ontology, not just from the last call, but before, is that.
Bye.
I mean,
I don't care about the last call and the before. This is the thing. And if you get nothing else from today's show, apart from the fact that there's an American Atheist Convention, an Atheist Day, and Jim's awesome, and all this other stuff, get this. Memory is faulty. Human beings are faulty. If you think you found an error in the show, you may in fact be right. I've made tons of errors in the 14 years that I've hosted this show. But if you want me to go back and actually correct an error, then the best thing to do, just like when you're having a debate, is to start by defining terms. And so if I give an explanation and I say, is that correct? And you're like, more or less with caveats. And then we start to ask about the caveats and you start talking about my understanding of your ontology from past calls. You are no longer a relevant part of this conversation because you cannot stay on topic. There is a method by which we can go about to figure out whether or not a mistake's been made and something that might correct somebody. And it doesn't meander over all the landscape of all of your suspicions about what you thought about what I said in the past. It's let's start now, define this. And if we agree, you can say, I think if you go back and listen to this episode, you'll find that you did not present this in the same way and it has problems. And I will say, cool, I'll go back and look at that episode and figure out what the actual case is. But if you're just going to keep going on with this trail of suspicions based on your memory and your understanding of me, you are fucking up big time. And I would be fucking up doing the same thing. This is why I constantly remind people, don't go out and claim that you can tell what somebody's motivations are unless you're really solid and can make a case for it. Because what matters is not the religious right just want to punish women for having sex. Well, there may be people out in the religious right that do want to punish women for having sex, but that doesn't mean it's the motivation. And what you should say, oh, well, the religious right just want to make women slaves to their biology. Well, I can tell you that when I was part of the religious right, that never entered my mind. I never said, you know what, I want to make women slaves to their biology. But if instead you said the religious right is wanting to enact legislation that has the effect of making women slaves to their biology, now you're talking about the facts. You're talking about what they did and what the consequences are. And that's bad enough. And it's something that makes it impossible for them to defend. Well, they can say, well, that wasn't my intention. Okay, great. I'm glad you're not as shitty as you could have been. but you're still doing something that is potentially shitty. And here's this. That's how you get people to recognize. But as soon as you tell somebody what their motivations are, if you're wrong, you've screwed up and they don't have to listen to anything else you say. It's like when somebody tells me, oh, you're not really an atheist, you know God exists. Well, I am aware that I, in fact, do not know that God exists, which means now that person has zero credibility for anything that they're going to say related to this because I know it stems from the fruit of a poisonous tree. And when you call in to say, hey, I think you got something wrong, cool. Let's discuss the subject, figure out what we agree and don't agree on, and then once we've done that, I can go back and look. But if you're claiming that, he wasn't even claiming this is what you meant. He was claiming this is what I think and I understood that you meant based on my memory of this call and this other call. I don't care. I care about the facts, not your impression of an interpretation of a memory of what you heard. And it's a waste of time on the show for us to sit here and talk about a call from however long ago, going around in circles about your interpretation of your memory of that call. There's a good way to solve these things, and there's a crappy way, and we just wasted 5 minutes on a crappy way. On that note, we got 2 calls left I'm going to try to get to. You got a preference?
First one.
Bug in Texas. Thanks for waiting. You're on with Jim Helton and Matt Dillahunty on occasion.
Hey, nice to meet you. I'm kind of nervous. This is my first time on the show, but I've been listening to... Hello?
Yeah, you're here.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've been listening to the show for a long time now. I'm 28, and I'm 28 now, but I've had doubts about religion in general since I was like 16 and 17. So let me speed up. Okay, so my dad was a Muslim. My mom was a Christian. My dad was in prison for 13 years. He was a Muslim before he got in prison, so he didn't just become a Muslim because of prison. And my mom is the evangelist. My stepdad was a preacher. I played the drums in church. I've done the whole, like, go to church like 3 to 4 times a week thing, all that.
Yep.
What I wanted to talk to you about and ask you, dealing with religion, and I see you guys talk on your show every week, and the people that call, and I see that they're going to argue. I see what makes this easy for you, because all I see is people arguing from emotion and wanting there to be something magical there, because if there's not, that just means that life can suck sometimes, and you have to figure out a way to make it better yourself. It's more convenient feeling that there is some kind of magicalness or something more going on when I almost had a car wreck.
Yep.
And I didn't die in that car wreck. So it's easy for me to make that a reason for me to believe it.
I suspect that you are correct that this is quite often the case, but it's very difficult to prove. But yes, I would say that's a fairly accurate assessment of some, I don't know, I think Jim's on board with that.
I'm sorry. Okay, let me get to more of a point because I'm kind of rambling. So,
yeah, no worries.
Okay, so the reason why I want to talk to you so bad is because you speak really unbiasedly, and I see that a lot of times you will even find yourself defending the Christian side, and and that's what actually got me way back when I was like 18. I've been like watching this show. What got me was when you were arguing with them, you could easily tell they were arguing from emotion and just wanting to counter what you were saying instead of listening to what you were saying. And you were actually helping them give a better argument than what they could have gave from the start. And when I saw that, I'm saying he legitimately wants an actual answer. He doesn't just want something that gives him a warm fuzzy. And me growing up in the South, I'm originally from Arkansas, but I moved to Texas from Mississippi because I lived in Mississippi for quite a while. I grew up basically in Mississippi. So I know what you mean about the Baptist church and the Bible Belt and all that type of stuff. And the problem, and it's not like I'm a scientist or I study or anything, but I'm black, if you haven't figured out. So black people are...
Oh my gosh, I thought it disconnected, and I was like, somebody's going to pull that clip out. Dude says he's black, and hosts hang up on him. So I'm so glad you're still here.
No, because I'm trying to stay on track. So
no, the phone went quiet for a second. We're good. Go ahead, Bug.
When people call into the show and you're countering with them, it's so easy because you legitimately want a real answer, and those people aren't saying that they disagree with you because what you said doesn't make sense. They disagree with it because if they agree, then they know that they don't make sense in their head. They're not making sense.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's like, is it all just emotions and us being so arrogant and smart that we don't have a fucking answer? We have to just make one, and God can just be plugged in anywhere. Is that all it is?
Go ahead, Jim.
Is it just arrogance?
I don't think that's all it is. I don't think there's any simple, here's the one answer for why we have these ideas. I think religions have built themselves up to offer comfort or the illusion of comfort, to get rid of some of the things that we're afraid of or ease those fears, while also instilling new fears and providing the one and only solution. Is it emotional? Yes. Is it personal? Yes. But I know plenty of incredibly intelligent theists who think that they have rock-solid, science-based arguments for God. When you point out the problems with those, they don't always retreat back to emotion or faith, although some of them do. Some of them just have whatever intellectual roadblock that makes them say, no, this must be the more probable answer. Like the guy I was talking with last night on a podcast was arguing for the improbability of something. And I gave him an example that demonstrated that things weren't as improbable as he thought. This, coin flipping thing, which I know I talked about before the show. I don't think I talked. Did I talk about it on the show?
Yep.
Okay. So the coin toss thing, and that was a good example that kind of stalled that. Now, where's he going to go from there? Well, I don't know. And when we're talking about people making arguments from probability, the question I keep asking is, how did you determine how probable God is as an explanation? If my house is on fire and we make a list of potential causes, I left a gas can in the garage in Texas. Don't do that. I had some faulty wiring. Somebody intentionally set it. Whatever. You make a list of all these and you calculate the probability. And how you know the probability is based on past experience. How many houses have caught fire because of this? And what signs would we look for that? If it was wiring, how do we find the origin? But let's say we have the best.
I'm sorry.
Let's say we have the best fire investigator, and he comes into my house and he goes, "Yep, there's the point of origin right there. Here's all the science shows it, and it's this point of origin, and it's directly behind that outlet. So I'm going to conclude that the most reasonable explanation is that there was a wiring fault right there, and that started the fire." Somebody else could say, "Nope, God started a fire directly behind that outlet." And I think that's more probable because I believe that God exists and God can do anything, and electrical circuits can't do anything or can't do everything. And so that makes it a much more probable explanation. And if you use flawed reasoning like that, somebody's going to go, yeah. Now, we don't tend to do that for fires because we have a better understanding for fires than we do for the diversity of life and the origin of the universe and what happens after you die. And so people stick God into those gaps in our knowledge.
We have to be careful making the claim that all people think this of emotion, because we don't know what all people think. They come at this from very different perspectives. Do a lot of people, like you said, come at this motion? Yes, a lot do. Do they insert God when they don't know? Yes, a lot of people do those things. But like Matt said, some people come at this intellectually and they truly believe or think these things, but that doesn't make them true.
I've debated Blake Gentle like 5 or 6 times, and we're friendly. He's been over the house. I like Blake. I don't think he's doing it primarily from emotion. I won't say that emotion doesn't play a part in it, because I wouldn't say that emotion doesn't play a part in my views. Of course it does. We're emotional creatures. It's just when you should strive to take the most unbiased approach you can. And in Blake's case, he's really fond of Bayes' theorem for analysis. And another video I'm going to be doing in the near future is why Bayes' theorem doesn't have any application in the question of gods or supernatural or single occurrence events.
Okay, but real quick, I just the reason I guess I'm coming, I base that off of my personal experience, so I say emotion because just from my experience, what led me to even question it in the first place and really not fear hell or fear burning in a lake of fire for eternity or whatever they're going to do if it doesn't exist.
Sure.
What really kept me from being scared of it and really not caring anymore, because I grew up watching my mom's life, And my mom, like I said, she's an evangelist, and that's why I just use the name Bug or whatever. It's a different name, but my mom had a really hard life, and I've only been basically with her most of the time because my stepdad that was a preacher, he was shit anyway, and real dad, we had a relationship over the phone and through letters, but I never met. My first time meeting him in real life was at his funeral, so I never ever met him like in real life, but we got to actually talk. But what made me not give a shit that if God exists or not is when you hear people talk about there being a plan and there being a reason for everything.
Yeah.
That sounds like the most laziest, easiest bullshit I've ever heard, because if it's all a part of a plan and this is all some kind of like watch or something in motion that everything happens for a reason. My mom is like 60 now, and I know there are things that she's wished she's always had. I want to give to her, and I've known her my whole life and watched her my whole life, crying and stuff. And like, my mom wakes up to this day now 6:00 a.m. and prays every single morning, no matter what day it is. Period. She wakes up at 6:00 and she prays and she speaks in tongues and she cries and she really believes all that in her heart. And that hurt me, that the kind of life I saw us have, like, because I'm fine now. I live in Arlington, Texas now. I have a pretty good job. I'm not struggling for money or anything. I play Xbox Live every day. I have friends. Like, life is fine, but
that was God's plan for you.
God. Yeah, fuck you, God.
That's the thing. This whole notion of a plan is bizarre.
Yeah.
My plan for your family is for you to have 4 miscarriages, then have a kid that survives only to die at the age of 2, because that will make you stronger. And I need more little, toddlers up in heaven. My plan for you is for you to be, president. But
let me tell you something, man.
Absolutely.
My aunt has cancer right now. My sister just got diagnosed with cancer about 3 or 4 months ago, and it was stage 2 when they found out about it. And when no, I'm lying. It was stage 1 when they found out about it, and it's a little personal, but it's in her breast, so it spreads faster in like the ducts. So it went from a stage 1 to like a stage 3 super fast, and she has to go through chemo to get the surgery because they can't just cut it out. So she's like lost all her hair now and stuff, and she's all really depressed. And I'm just like, you know what? That's a fucking plan. That's like, and then I have my niece, I have my nephew. My nephew stays with me now. He's in there on my couch right now. My mom is back home, but she's gonna have to end up moving here because we don't have anybody to watch the kids. But anyway, long story short, people coming up to other people and saying that it's all a part of a plan. That's just basically saying, we don't really have an answer for it.
Yep.
And
I'm sorry you're hurting, and I don't know what to say, but let's see if I can put a positive spin on it. Yeah.
It's like,
I can say that if this was God's plan, God's kind of a fuck up.
Yeah. It's for people listening that are Christians. I was a Christian a long time. I didn't curse. I was probably the most culture Christian black guy you ever met. I was really depressed at that time because I really didn't. I wanted a reasoning for why things were being bad. When I realized you have to make your life and make things better for you, you control that. You control your work ethic, whether you get up or not in the morning. If you believe in God, I tell you what, don't put in job applications. Just pray about it. Don't put in any job applications. Just pray that somebody calls you to give you a job.
And then even if you do get a job, that still doesn't prove that a God got it for you.
Right, exactly,
I got to let you go, Bug. We got one more call I got to try to get to before we close this out. But yeah, thank you.
Last one I'm looking forward to. It's about kids.
Yeah, and that's why I want to make sure we got to it. One thing about this whole plan thing is that it's. One time at an event, somebody asked me, well, which model, the Christian model or the atheist model, is more appealing or more comforting? And I was like, well, it doesn't matter because I care about which one's true, not which one's more appealing. But if you want to know the truth, I find this one far more appealing. And it's like, if you believe in karma, or if you believe that God has a plan, then when bad things happen to you, it's because you deserved it or you needed it. And now in my life, when bad things happen, it's because the universe doesn't give a shit about me, and it's up to me to make sure that I'm taking care of me. That was as straightforward as we could get. Is it Icha in Georgia?
Icha.
Hi, Icha. You're on with
Hi.
Matt and Jim, and we're going to let Jim finish out the show with an answer to your question or issue.
Thank you. Hi, Jim. Hi, Matt. I've been listening to the show since recently. I want to give you a little bit of a background on myself. I'm from Honduras originally, and I moved to the States a year and a half ago.
Well, welcome. Glad
Yes.
you made it past that wall.
Got here just in
Yeah,
time.
we're on an investor's visa. And I come from a very religious country and a very religious society. But fortunately, unlike many of the callers I've heard, my family was not religious, and it was never an obligation in my family to be religious.
Right.
So I've been an atheist since I can remember, maybe since I was 12 or 13, that I thought that things just didn't add up and it wasn't logical, and my mind functions in a logical way.
Icha, how old are your kids?
They're 8, and they're twins. And I moved to Georgia, and they are starting to ask about Mass and church.
Okay,
And
Catholic
their
Mass, not math.
classmates Go to,
Okay. I was like, 8-year-olds asking about math? Good for them. Mass, maybe not so good.
Yeah, Mass, and why other kids go to Mass and why they don't. And it's very hard for me to explain it to them because they're still in school and they're 8. They're twins. And it's the exact age that they start to tell people about what they know and what they believe. And the thing I'm most afraid of is that since I live in a community where people do go to church, that they will be alienated within the community.
This is a big deal. I'm gonna let Jim address this.
I think you should tell your kids the truth. They can handle the truth. And how you choose to go about that and how your kids choose. And I would honestly say what they choose to do, it should be their choice as long as you, as a parent, let them be aware of the consequences of their actions. I had this conversation with my son in grade school when he was in grade school. He wore a shirt to school that said, "We'll convert for evidence," in grade school. We let him know the consequences of his actions, that, teachers could look at him different. Kids could do this. He was like, "I am not going to hide." He has handled it very well. My daughter at the time chose not to be upfront,
right,
not to talk, and it was her choice.
And that's perfectly acceptable as well.
Yes. And come full circle, now that she's 14, she's speaking all the country as an open atheist. Meaning, I try not to protect my kids. I let them know the consequences of their actions. You should tell them the truth and let them know, hey, if you talk about these things, here could be the reaction.
There are some friends that you may not be allowed to play with at some point.
And they did. But at the same time, when we moved to our subdivision and they came out and said, "I'm an atheist," people are like, "I'm so glad you're an atheist. We thought we were the only one." And they were like, "There's 5 atheists on this street. You've been playing with each other for 6 years and no one knew because no one would say anything."
Yeah. It's one of those things where...
That's how I feel. Like I'm still in the closet in some way, not with my family, but with society. And
well, there was a slight assumption here that your kids were non-believers as well, and we didn't actually discuss.
Yeah.
The big thing is if they're curious about why you don't go to church, what Jim's saying is true. You can be honest with your kids about what you believe, and you can just explain. There are some people who believe these things, and they participate in these activities, and I don't share that belief, and that's why I don't. You're going to have to, study this and make up your own mind at some point, because I don't want to do what other parents are doing, which is saying, because I'm Catholic, my kids are Catholic, or because I'm Jewish, my kids are Jewish, or because I'm a Hindu, my kids are Hindu. Instead, I don't believe any of that. I would like for you to go out and explore, and if you find out that I'm wrong, and you have good reason for it, come back and tell me. And if you wind up agreeing with me, that's great, but I love you, you're my kids. And just be aware, as Jim was pointing out, that, what you do and say about all this is going to have consequences. It's one of the reasons why I have such a problem with the Boy Scouts, is that not only do they end up benefiting from public funds, but they march into a school and they have access to these kids and hype it all up as if it's fun, and some of these kids join. And what if your best friend joins the Cub Scouts and you can't, because Cub Scouts won't allow atheists to join? Boy Scouts will now allow girls, because the Girl Scouts were awesome and outshining the Boy Scouts at every turn. And hopefully, I'm optimistic that eventually the Boy Scouts will also allow atheists, and then we can have scouting without having to create Scouting for All and all these other secondary organizations. But I don't have kids, but love your kids, talk to your kids, be honest with them, be supportive of them, realize that, you were imperfect and flawed, and so were they, and you probably screwed them up, because that's what every parent does a little bit. And, when the bad things happen, when they lose a friend because there's a disagreement about religion, talking to them about how to handle it and whether or not that friendship is worth making an effort to salvage, or whether it's just one of those things where some people aren't going to agree and that's going to be sad, but wouldn't you rather be surrounded with and have friends who are going to accept you for who you are and not expect you to change to adopt their beliefs?
Okay, that sounds like something that makes sense.
It's something we should tell to adults, too, with regard to family. Jen Peoples has been saying for years that your family, if you act like family, and that the blood relationship has nothing to do with it. I have people who I'm not blood related to in any close sense, apart from we're all humans, who are far more family to me than members of my immediate family are. And I'm okay with that. Yes, it makes me sad. I've lost friends, I've lost family members and relationships that I won't reconnect with. But if the loss was because they were expecting me to be what they wanted me to be, I'm better off without them.
But I think it's a bad message to send your kids to be afraid of who you are.
Right.
Let them know, tell them the truth, have these honest conversations. And again, let them know the consequences of their actions, and they will decide if it's appropriate. Do they want to tell people they're an atheist? Or do they want to tell people they're not religious? Or do they just want to play and not even address it and walk away?
I'd rather not talk about it.
Yeah.
It's none of your business. It's between me and whatever God I do or don't believe in.
But letting your kids make those decisions and having those conversations. I have some of the best conversations with my kids as they were growing up, talking about these things when they would come back to school and how they handled it, and did it go well, and was it no big deal, or was it a big deal, and what were they going to do about it? Like it's a good, don't be afraid of the conversation with your kids. You should be excited to have these conversations.
It's also worth pointing out that if your kids are also non-believers, that you can do that wrong. That if you're the atheist marching into school to tell all of your little friends how stupid they are for believing in fairy tales like God, you're probably making a big mistake.
Yeah.
On that note, Icha, I got to let you go because we're way over time. I want to thank you for your call.
Well, thank you. And thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
We're glad to touch on that subject as well. Thank you, Jim, for coming out today and doing this.
Excellent time.
Our thanks to all the people who are down here to see the show. You can scream and hoot and holler. It's South by Southwest weekend or week here in Austin. But most importantly, for me personally, the people on the other side of that wall who screen the calls, make the show happen, and do all this stuff so that we can talk and have a good time. ACA is a nonprofit educational organization supported by volunteers, by people on Patreon. We are here at the Free Thought Library, which is open 7 days a week from 11 to 9, and there's something going on all the time. If you don't have a community like this in your area, and this is a community, and you are welcome and wanted here, why haven't you started building one? You don't have to build up 9 television shows the way we have. You don't have to build up any TV shows or podcasts or anything at all. But if you're out there and you find that you don't have a community, then reach out to the ACA and other communities, because there are lessons we have learned that might be beneficial to people. But at a minimum, go out and do something, because we need as many out atheists as we can to normalize this, to make the activism easier, to make people realize they're not alone. And while they may have to sit in a corner at Christmas as the ostracized person in their family, after everybody else goes to bed, they can head out and come have a drink with some like-minded people and realize that it's those people who have the problem and not them. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. when I had the
I
thing.
saw the caller number 6, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to let